Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. It is CoachFury, and today we are back in the world of the CBGM, the online multiplayer league for Draft Day Sports College Basketball 21. And as you can probably see by the title of the screen at the moment, we are going into the world of draft projections. So, for those of you who are not aware, in the CBGM, the declarations of players going to the draft, the freshmen, the rookies, the juniors, the seniors, all going to the draft was all completed, I believe, a couple of nights ago. And well, it's a long list of players, and there's nothing better to do than to sit there, grab yourself a cup of coffee and work your way through the players, try and see whether you can make some kind of mock draft. And that's exactly what I've done. I've tried to have a look at first round, second rounders, and trying to make a little list of lottery players, top 5 players, etc. So I'm going to try and break this down into 2 episodes. This episode is going to be focused on the second rounders, and then the next episode we'll look at the first round prospects. But before we obviously look at that and talk a little bit about how that, who's actually going to be possibly a top 5 player versus a lottery player versus a second rounder, etc., it's worth probably just giving an idea of what my assumptions are and what my thinking is around this, because I've played the pro game quite a lot. I don't know how the ratings necessarily translate across from the college game to the pro game. And well, it's worth giving you a sense of what my biases are, because I'm sure there's going to be people who look at this and go, oh my goodness me, why is this player not in the top 5? You've put him as a second rounder and so on. And well, we're not all perfect. And there's some reasons for why I've probably positioned players higher than others. And we'll just talk about that now. So my personal sort of bias factor that I have is that I look at freshmen and I say that they will have, in theory, more potential than a senior player, just because of the fact that they've only been in college for 1 year, and therefore, in theory, the potential rating of that player should be higher than the senior. So that's kind of a little bit I factored in. Also for myself, I like shooting size, pro size. So these 6'6" centers and 6 foot under guards are probably not going to survive in the pro game. So that's been weighted in. And also in terms of skills based positions. So for example, a 6'6" center who plays at college, who's good inside, can't do much else, can maybe do a bit of rebounding, is probably not going to be the best fit in the pro game, because that type of size really is a wing position, and for a wing position you need defense, you need outside shooting, you need passing and handling ability. So I factored sort of that in. That's my thinking. That's the kind of things I think about when I draft a player in the pro game, and that's something I've taken into consideration for this sort of first stab at a kind of a rough mock draft as such for the CBGM. So other things to mention, obviously there's a whole host of players that have declared. I've made the decision that I'm not necessarily going to pick 30 players for the first round and 30 players for the second round. I've kind of tried to factor in the fact that there will be 4 to 5 probably international players, maybe more, and there'll be 4 to 5 sort of G Development League players. So these are the players that in the pro game will play in the G League versus the college and will enter the draft in the next season. So obviously some other things to note. I don't understand the correlation necessarily between the college games 1 to 100 ratings that have been manipulated versus the pro ratings. So we've just made an assumption that it's more or less a 1-to-1, maybe slightly lower, considering these are college prospects going into the pro game. So I've kind of just factored it based on the college ratings only. And also I've had no sight of the pro game actual mock or the scouting within that, so I don't have absolutely no idea how the game has ranked players and how the AI is actually going to pick anyone at that stage. So this is based purely on my own research within the CBGM file for Draft Day Sports College Basketball. So please take that into consideration, that when we do see the pro version of the mock, this may be wildly different, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour as to why it is slightly different. So first thing we've got to do before we get to the second round prospects, there are going to be an awful lot of undrafted players, I think, in this list of players who have declared for the draft. And let's just quickly talk about them and why I think they're going to go undrafted. So first up we have Valerie Barrett. look, the guy has huge potential. It's clear there, you can see his potential rating. But for me, those ratings at the moment indicate that he's probably going to be a G League player. And I can't see anyone taking a flyer on him, certainly not in the first round. Second round, it's questionable, mainly because his discipline and court IQ and ball handling is just absolutely atrocious. So I can't see him getting drafted. Someone might take a flyer on him in the late 50s, maybe. But for me, that potential, whilst it is there, he doesn't have the current ability to kind of get drafted as such. I see him going into the G League and probably developing there. And maybe he ends up bouncing in and out of the Pro League. But for me, I can't see that. And it's very much a similar story with Corey Jackson. You can see he's only a 1.5 star prospect from Florida. He's just terrible, to be frank. He's 6 foot, so he's undersized immediately at guard position in the Pro League. He has no ball handling ability, no court IQ, no discipline. I will be surprised if a G League team picks him up, to be honest with you. So I can't see him getting drafted either. We move on to Lamar Coleman. Similar kind of story. He does have good size for his position at the pro level. He's 6'8", 238 pounds, but there's a lot of red flags here. He doesn't necessarily have a very good free throw, which is a concern. Considering he does draw fouls okay, his ball handling and passing is just terrible. You can't basically play him on the wing. He can't defend. He has no discipline. He has no court IQ. He is one that probably, again, might not even make the G League. So then we move on to Johnny Brown. Similar kind of story. He's probably slightly better than previous prospects, but again, no ball handling, no court IQ, no discipline. He has potential. His size is there. I could see him probably being picked up by a G League team because he has a little bit of all-round ability and the size, but I can't see him going much further than that. Therefore, he's going to be undrafted. And then we've got Wes Daniels. So we're starting to move up a little bit in quality of player here. But again, he's undersized at 6 foot. For a point guard who's undersized, who can't handle the ball, has no court IQ or discipline, that's always a concern. The thing that might save him and might get him a G League invite is around his outside shooting ability. And he's not a bad foul drawer and stealer of the ball. So maybe he'll get a look in there. But for me, I can't see him being drafted either. And we've also got Tommy Page, similar kind of story. Undersized guards seem to be the flavour of the month in terms of players who have declared for the CBGM this year. And you'll see I've kind of rated them quite negatively. Just size, you need size at the pro level, and if you don't have size, you have to have some real unique talent. And guys like Tommy Page just don't have that. They don't have the discipline or court IQ. His ball handling is not too bad. I could see him getting a G League invite, because he has a shot, he has a bit of ball handling, a bit of passing, but he's more going to be suited to an undersized off guard rather than an actual point guard, which to me, no one's going to draft him for a pro team. He'll get a look at the G League level. Steve Cage is next up on our list. So a guy who's got good size. He's actually not terrible. He's a really athletic player, which is going to be interesting to see how that translates to the Pro League, in terms of the draft and how that looks. But, he's a good stealer. He actually can play a couple of positions because he's got a shot. He can handle the ball a little bit. For me, the thing that let him down was his defensive ability. If he can get that up, he could certainly possibly make the back end of a bench rotation in the future. But at the moment, G League all over. He could be actually a pretty good G League prospect for a team that picks him up maybe on a short 1-year deal, see how he develops, and maybe give him a summer league invite possibly next year. But he probably should have stayed at school, to be honest with you. He might have developed into a much better prospect and probably would have been a first round pick at that stage, or at least a second round pick, I think, in another year or so. I've just double check actually. Yeah, so he had another couple of years left. So we move on to Nathan Christie. Again, the quality's slightly improving, but he's got good size. He's actually got some good potential. He needs to sort out that ball handling, court IQ, and discipline though. It's just terrible, which means he's probably going to go undrafted, but probably almost a lock for a G League invite because whilst his defensive ability is not great, he can do a bit of everything. He needs to improve his shot. That's absolutely essential. But he draws fouls really well. He'll get to the line. His free throw shooting is not terrible. But, if he can improve his shooting, maybe get that defense up a little bit, as well as the discipline and court IQ that he should develop in the G League, he could well end up in the Pro League eventually, but not at the moment. And then we have Scott Milasapp, who was an interesting one to look at actually, because whilst his discipline and court IQ is low, it's not as low as some of the other prospects we've just talked about. His defensive ability is still suspect, but not as suspect as others. He has an outside shot. He has a good scoring ability, so he's going to get points in the G League, I would imagine. Stealing ability is pretty good, but he didn't really have anything that sort of made me think, oh yes, a team is absolutely going to pick him up. He has good size though, so maybe a team sees some potential in him and takes a punt on him. But for me, there was other better prospects who would be in the second round. So Scott Milasapp is probably going to go undrafted. And that ends our undrafted list. We move on to the second round now. So the second round, I've not put it in any order. I focused mainly in terms of orders on the first round, which we'll have in the next video. So there is no order for the second round. It's just a list of guys who I think will be in the second round, and we'll just talk about why they're in the second round, probably not the first round. So first up on our list is Chad Kimbrough. So he looks like a pretty good prospect. He's got a good shot. He can play defense. He can steal the ball. He's a little bit undersized though, but his ball handling and passing was not too terrible. And you can see there his shooting numbers are not great. So I could see probably him being a late second round pick if I had to guess. Someone who could probably bring just a little bit of stealing, a little bit of handling. Probably is never going to be a starter in the Pro League. A guy probably will be drafted in the second round in my opinion, and then end up basically being assigned to a G League, probably for the length of his second round contract. Then probably, unless he can improve his shot, probably then fading out of the league if I had to guess. Next on our list is Michael Johnson. So Michael Johnson was an interesting prospect because I had him as a borderline undrafted player. Potential is awesome. The thing that saved him for me is actually his outside shooting. His outside shooting is probably going to get him in the second round of this draft. His discipline and court IQ again is just atrocious. Defensibility is suspect, but that outside shot, I think someone might take a little punt on him because he has size and he has outside shooting, which is something that every team will want to try and get, want to try and develop. So that to me is why he's in there versus undrafted. Then we move on to Keith Dixon from Kansas. So a similar kind of question mark to Johnson really. Terrible discipline, terrible court IQ, terrible ball handling, but he has size. He's 6'8", 195 pounds. He has a nice bit of potential. As probably a guy, to be honest with you, should have stayed around again. He was only a freshman. He probably should have stayed another year or two and developed some of these skills, because if he'd have probably come in with better defensive ability, better ball handling, better court IQ and discipline, and that outside shot, he probably could have been a borderline first round pick. But, you know, he's decided to declare early. I think he's going to be a second round pick because someone will see the things that I see in terms of he's not great at anything. He has a bit of shooting ability, but he has that potential and size. And someone will probably take a pick on the second round and say, yeah, I'll take that. I'll try and develop him, you know, see if he works. Don't know how his development would go. But if his development was excellent, he could end up being in a rotation in the Pro League possibly. But at the moment, he certainly won't be. He'll certainly be drafted and assigned to the G League immediately. So we have Andy Morris next up. So we're starting to see some guys with some better ratings now. Andy Morris is an interesting one. He's not as undersized as everyone else at the guard position. The ball handling ability is atrocious, so he is going to have to play off guard. Court IQ and discipline is atrocious as well. But the interesting thing about Andy Morris is whilst his shooting numbers are pretty terrible, he is not a bad rebounder, passer, stealer and shot blocker, which is interesting. He's just an interesting prospect in that sense. I could see someone taking him and probably saying, yeah, we can build him into a sort of a slasher type off-guard player who will come on, give us 5, 6, 7 minutes maybe and see how he works. He'll almost certainly be assigned to the G League to begin with though, because they'll have to probably work on some of his preferences. As you can probably see, he's not really quite a slasher at this moment in time. His drive is only 27% versus shot, so they'll need to work on him. But I could see him, because of that, being a second round pick. Horace Jones. So Horace Jones is a guy, if I'm being perfectly honest, if his shooting numbers were better and his court IQ and discipline was better, he probably may have been a first round pick. But he's not. And the reason is because he can't shoot. He has no discipline. He has no court IQ. But he's good size. He has some interesting potential. Defensive ability needs to be developed more. But, you know, he's a guy who could come in and he might be able to give you 4 to 6 minutes in a pro league at this moment in time. Possibly. On a terrible team, not on a team that's a playoff team. And, yeah, I'm just interested to see how that IQ and discipline develops. But he needs to improve his shot. He clearly needs to improve his outside shot from what it is, and I'm guessing around there's some preference difficulties there because he is sort of a weird mid-range guy. Probably needs to work on that. So that's why he's a second round pick. And then we move on to Anton Crooks. So a guy who has a really good inside shot. Terrible defensive ability, but he's a rebounder, so he's a specialist at the pro level. He's a guy who could come in, get you some rebounds, make a shot inside if you need him to, probably run some pick and rolls with him. But the problem that's going to weight him down and probably make him a second round prospect versus a first round prospect is discipline, court IQ, his ball handling, and also his defensive ability and his size. So he's undersized for a centre at the next level, so he probably going to end up playing probably a power forward position, an undersized power forward, and because of that, he's very limited in what you can get from him. But if you've got a team who's playing small ball, who's got a dominant centre, who you just want someone to come in there, give you a bit of rebounding, make a shot if he needs to, he's a perfect guy for that, and that's why he's probably going to be a second round prospect. William Mosley. So William Mosley is a guy who probably again should have stayed in the college league, to be perfectly honest with you. He has a terrible shot at this stage. He hasn't shown the shooting ability that you'd want him to. Probably because he needs to actually take some outside shots. He's only made 2 outside shots attempts in the entire season, of which he made 50%, and his outside shooting rating is 71. So do the math there. He probably basically should never be shooting mid-range, should only be shooting outside shots. At 6'5", he is going to obviously be a shooting guard at the next level. So if you can develop the outside shot, his ball handling passing is actually not bad. His defense is not bad. His court IQ and discipline is not terrible. So I could see someone taking a second round flyer on him because he's not terrible. He needs a bit of preference work, but he's good size. He certainly has shown that he can be a good stealer of the ball, and I'd be interested to see a team that takes him. Maybe gives him half a season in the G League, fixes his outside shot, brings him into a rotation, and he could be a rotation guy in the future. But at this stage, given the fact that he broke his leg as well, there's probably question marks over his actual durability, which means that that's another red flag that would mean he's not a first round pick and a second round pick. Moving on, we've got the first Michigan prospects that we've talked about from my team. So probably the guy I know probably the best in this entire draft is Scotty Alsa. So Scotty Alsa on paper looks like a first round prospect, but the thing that puts me off is that he is undersized for a forward, so he's going to play shooting guard. If he's going to play shooting guard, he has no ball handling ability, which is a concern. So for me, that makes him a second round prospect immediately off the bat. Factored in the fact that his shooting numbers are not great, he hasn't got a terrible outside shot. He just simply doesn't take enough of them. He really needs to be the type of 3 and D wing player. That's where I see him going. And for him to do that, ball handling needs to come up, and he needs to just basically take outside shots off of screens. That is how he is going to be a good player at the next level. But that being said, that ball handling ability is really the main factor that has weighed him down in the second round, because there are just better first round potential prospects who already have some of those skills already. So Scotty Alsa, unfortunately, is a second round pick, which is a shame for me from Michigan, but there we go. So Keaton Williams. Now we're starting to get to some of the players who actually, on paper, people will be questioning our first round picks. But when you look at it in the wider scheme of things, you can probably understand why I've maybe put them in the second round. So Keaton Williams, on paper, looks phenomenal. Great outside shot, Great rebounder, great defender, good ball handling. Court IQ is questionable, but he's a good stealer of the ball, and he has some interesting traits, like he's a sharpshooter, defender, dominates, in terms of like he can get into the paint, etc. The reason I haven't weighted him in the first round versus this round is quite simply because that court IQ and his size. So he's 6'1", court IQ is only 39. I'm not sure how it's going to translate in the pro level because point guard is such an essential position. You either need to be a good size and have handling ability, or just be phenomenal court IQ, a phenomenal defender, and still be, undersized. So Keaton Williams is purely down to size and court IQ is why I've put him so low. That's unfortunate for him. I think he could go in the first round, but that was one of the tough decisions that I had to make. So I pegged him down in the second round. So Shannon Smith. Similar kind of story here, really. Court IQ has kind of let him down. He's a much worse shooter than Williams, so that's why he's basically even more in the second round to the first round. His defensive ability is questionable, and for a 6-foot guy, if you can't play defense, you're going to struggle at the next level. But I guess if I compare him to Williams I could see being drafted in the second round and playing minutes eventually in the Pro League. Smith, I think, needs a lot more work to get into the Pro League just because he's so undersized. Ryan Prince is next up, and you could probably see the trend towards the back end of this list in the second round. Again, another undersized guard who is actually not a bad shooter. He's not too bad. He has an outside shot. His court IQ is not terrible, but the ball handling ability is kind of the worry here. He needs to get that up. If he can get that up, he might be a serviceable backup guard in the pro level. But there's some better guards who are in the first round, which means that Ryan Prince is probably going to be a second round prospect as well. Lionel Keith. Okay, so Lionel Keith is basically in the second round because he just hasn't played. So it's very hard for a pro team to assess him. On paper here, he looks like a second round prospect just based on ratings. His defensive ability is okay. He is okay size, not the greatest scorer. He doesn't necessarily have a shot as such. He's not really a good inside scorer, not really a good outside scorer. His ball handling ability is questionable. He has potential, and his ratings are quite high already, which makes me think that possibly he could be a guy who ends up in the second round who has huge potential. Given the fact he's only a junior as well, I'm interested to see where he goes in the second round, but I do think he will go there. He has some great athleticism, great stealing ability. I think he's just a guy that a pro team needs to bring in and nurture. If they can nurture him through, he could well be a decent pro. But at the moment, there's not enough on paper to really justify him being a first round pick. Cameron Williams, again, another undersized guard who can play a bit of defense, handle the ball, pass the ball pretty well. Shooting numbers are questionable inside, but outside numbers look okay. Court IQ is definitely a question mark. Again, because he's undersized, he has poor court IQ. For me, I would not want him anywhere near my team handling the ball. He could end up possibly making himself into, again, an off guard who has an outside shot. But again, if you're going to just already think about being a specialist, you're probably a second round pick. Alan Nash. So Alan Nash was a guy who I actually pegged down as the first rounder, but then actually had to change him into a second rounder. Reason being is that he's 6'1", so he's undersized. I had him in the first round because he has some really interesting traits. That 99 pass and 92 outside shot, despite not necessarily showing that he has an outside shot at college level, made me wonder, maybe there's something that doesn't quite marry up in the college game to where he would go in the pros. But, he could be a really good value second prospect. Court IQ again is questionable, but, his passing ability, I think he could be a really good G League guard. And I think that's where he'll end up being probably when I really think about it. He needs to definitely sort out his shooting numbers. That he can't shoot like that to be anywhere near a pro team. But, I think he could be a really good G League player. Borderline pro player if a couple of things go his way and he manages to sort out some of that court IQ and shooting, really. So Aloysius Walton is next up. Again, another undersized guard. There's just so many of them in this draft, it looks like. Similar kind of story, really. Poor court IQ, poor ball handling. Shot is not bad, so he probably will get drafted. He'll probably be a second round pick again a G League player. But to be a first round pick, you either need size, you need court IQ, you need ball handling, and you need a shot. And he just doesn't have enough of those tools to knock him into the first round at this stage. Possibly another guy, maybe if he'd stayed another year, given the fact that there's a lot of these undersized guards who have come into this draft, he might have been a first round prospect, maybe. But at the moment, he's a second rounder. Brendan Page. So Brendan Page, terrible shooter, good size, terrible discipline, cool IQ and ball handling. But he's got some good things in his favour, which means he's definitely going to be drafted. Second round pick, I think, because of the red flags here. The fact that he doesn't necessarily have a shot yet. Teams are going to have to work with him on that. He necessarily doesn't have the IQ despite the passing ability. If he could get that up and be a nice little wing passer, that would be an interesting prospect for him. He needs to basically, again, move his shooting from the inside to the outside. That's where he'll be. He'll probably be a small forward, borderline, undersized power forward in the next level. But too many things to work with again. He has some good things on paper, though, which I think teams will be enticed about in the second round. Mike Cooper from Michigan State. So, again, similar story. Undersized guard. His court IQ discipline is not terrible. His ball handling is passable. But for me, that shooting number is the biggest worry. If you've got a guy who's undersized, shooting 39%, only 32% from three-point range, something's going wrong given the fact that he has 100 in outside shooting in college. Maybe it's around the strategy of Michigan State. He didn't necessarily fit with that. But because of that, I think that's the thing that's going to hold him back. If he'd have been like a 40+% three-point shooter and his numbers would have looked like this, he may well have been a first round pick. He was a really tough one to decide on because he has good defense, good stealing. He is one of those players who I think if he comes in, gets his outside shot sorted, he could go into the pros and be a backup guard, certainly, because he can play defense. He has an outside shot then. He can pass, he can handle, he can steal, and his court IQ is not terrible. But at the moment, too many red flags again for Mike Cooper. Eric Ress. So Eric Ress is again, another undersized guard. Said that so many times now. Similar story. Court IQ, handling's not too bad. Discipline's not too bad. Shooting numbers are okay, but again, needs work. He needs to develop that outside shot. He needs to show that he has that outside shot at a good volume and a good percentage rate. But again, similar story. There's just so many undersized guards. There's only so many you can put in the first round, really. And then we have Greg Logan. So Greg Logan was a guy I had pegged in the first round till I looked at his shooting numbers, to be perfectly honest. So I love the fact that he's good size. He has an outside and inside shot, despite the fact he's not shown it at the college level. The ratings wise, he does. He is an okay defender, really good rebounder, good stealer, can block shots, and he's demonstrated a little bit of doing everything at the college level, which I like. So that's why I picked him as a first rounder originally. But again, as I said, when I picked up his shooting numbers, that really worried me. 39%, 23% from outside. How much of that is down to scheme versus his ratings, I don't know. When you actually look at it on paper, it's really hard to tell. And for me, that was the biggest question mark that basically meant him going from probably being an early first round pick to probably an early second round pick, in my opinion. BJ Sinville. So we're getting to guys again who have some really good talented prospects. I mean, he's 6'9". He's a good size for a forward, not a centre. He's not going to play centre at the next level. His shot is good. He has an outside shot. He can play a bit of defense, blocking, stealing, all excellent. He is a guy you get up and you can probably play for 10 to 12 minutes in the pro level from day one. You have to accept the fact that he's probably going to foul out a lot. He's going to turn over the ball a lot because he's IQ and ball handling. He's not going to make free throws despite having an amazing drawing foul ability, which is going to be the single most frustrating thing about Sinville in the next level. Coaches are going to go absolutely spare at him because he's going to get fouls, he's going to generate fouls, but he's not going to finish them. He's not going to get those free throws that you probably need. So I think he's a guy who's probably going to go high in the second round. Team's going to draft him. Team's going to probably play him from the bat 10, 11 minutes. and get him in against the team's other power forward, play defense, get rebounds, draw fouls, cause them into foul trouble. So I'm interested to see where he goes. Again, similar to Logan, he was a guy I had pegged in sort of the late first round, early second round, but he got nudged out in the end to the second round in my list. Julius Miles, so a guy with interesting potential. Whilst he doesn't have a great shooting ratings, his numbers look pretty good at college level. His defensive ability needs work though. His discipline, court IQ needs work. But he has size, he has rebounding, he has passing and scoring, and he looks like he can score at a decent percentage. So the only thing that's really holding him back is that defensive ability, to be honest with you, and that ball handling ability. If he can get those up, he could be a pretty good pro prospect going forward. But I think for now, probably will go in the G League and look like a good player in the G League. And then teams will probably start giving him minutes slowly and start developing him that way. So Dave Brown, right. Well, Dave Brown is a really interesting option here. He is a guy who I think if he'd have played the season would have been a first round pick. And I'll tell you why, because he's 6'8", good size, good outside shot, good free throw, draws fouls, rebounds, block shot, steals, does a bit of everything. Court IQ discipline's okay for that position as well. But the problem is he tore his Achilles. Question marks will be over his durability. And I think that will probably knock him down from being a first rounder to a second rounder. He's a guy I think probably should have stayed another year. If he'd have stayed another year, I could have probably seen him being a borderline lottery pick if he'd have carried on developing. But for what it is, he only played the one game. In the one game, he looked absolutely phenomenal. But one game is not enough really to go on. Ratings wise, looks good. I think he'll probably be a high second round pick. Alfredo Aloko. So, a guy who has some good scoring numbers, looks pretty good across the board. The thing that let him down, in my opinion, was that court IQ. He needs to get that up to be a first round pick. Needs to demonstrate that he's not necessarily going to foul out at the next level, but he has some really good things in his factor. He can play a bit of defense, rebound, pass, scores inside. Probably, given he's 6'7", he probably needs to develop that outside shot a bit more. That's the thing that kind of probably weighted him down from being a first round pick to a second round pick, because of his size and the fact that he will need an outside shot at the next level. But interesting prospect. He could be an undersized power forward possibly for a team, but in order for that to work, you need the right players, which means that for me, I think he's going to be a second round pick. Melvin Phillips, so another guy who 6'9" is good size. His shooting numbers are pretty good. He was another one who was just a tough call whether he'd be in the first round or second round. He's got great defense, great rebounding, IQ is okay, discipline is a bit of a concern, but his numbers look pretty good. Granted, he's only playing for Indiana State, which is probably why he's bumped into the second round, because maybe the numbers don't necessarily reflect as much as if he was on a top program. But I like the fact he's shooting 49%, 43% from 3-point range. Could be a really interesting stretch for the next level. Probably going to go unrecognised, I think, in the draft, which means that I think he's going to be a second round pick. And that ends our preview of the second round and the undrafted players. And next time we'll come back and we will look at the first round and decide, who's going to be in the top 5, who's going to be in the lottery, who will be the late first round picks and why. But, interested to hear your thoughts. Are there any players I've listed here in terms of second round and undrafted that you think actually will be drafted higher up or drafted at all? Interested to hear your thoughts. But I'll try and refine this mock as we go through the postseason, etc. Because obviously we haven't factored that in. But just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of the CBGM and the guys who are going into the Pro League who have declared. And next time we'll be back talking just first round.